If you're selling property with renters in it, you're going to find out pretty quickly there are some big mistakes you just don't want to make. And that if you make these mistakes, it might end up costing you money in the long run, but it's for sure going to cost you a lot of headache moving forward. My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska with Keller Williams, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today, we're going to be talking about what some big pitfalls, some big mistakes are for people who are selling properties with renters in it. So we'll get into all of that in just a minute. Before we get started, you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe, and let's go and jump into today's video. First big mistake I see a lot of homeowners make when they're selling property with renters in it is they don't explain ahead of time to the tenant what is actually going to happen. They just kind of drop it on them last minute, and that does kind of create a little bit of distrust in that relationship. The second big thing I see is that they don't put their tenants on a month-to-month lease. So if you're in a position where you can do this, that is preferable. If the end of their lease isn't coming up in the very near future. Now, if you have them locked in for a lease that's still got 6 months on it, nothing you can do about that. But if possible, it's best to get them on a month-to-month lease because that makes it a little bit more flexible with working with the buyer's timeline when you eventually do get under contract. Now, the third big mistake I see a lot of sellers make is not removing problematic tenants. So what I mean by this is if you have a tenant that is just outright hostile to the entire process of getting the property sold, then they are going to be doing a lot of passive aggressive stuff to really slow down the process and almost make it downright impossible as far as showings and everything else they can possibly do to make sure the property doesn't show in a very good light because they have nothing in it for it to sell. And so they're going to dig their heels in. And really where I see this come out is the tenant is not going to be passive aggressive and they're not going to be problematic to you as the landlord. They are going to take it all out on your listing agent. And I've seen this happen before. I've been the recipient of this where the tenant, they're not happy with the situation. They're going to be all happy and, act like they're all good talking with the landlord. And to the listing agent, they're just going to be complete Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So remove the problematic tenant as soon as possible. If they're showing they're not cooperating, it's going to sound like, oh, we're going to lose rental income. It's going to be terrible. Guarantee you long term, you're probably going to make more because the property is going to show in a much better light if that tenant's not there actively trying to sabotage the entire transaction. The next big downfall I see for landlords selling their property is not having all of their documents all squared away before we go onto the market. So what documents I'm talking about are the leases, the move-in inspections, certificates of estoppel, any repairs have been done on the property in the past couple of years. Make sure any documentation for the property is all squared away. We want to show the new buyers that this has been a very well-run, efficient business and that all they need to do is step in, apply a little capital, and it's all theirs. They come in, it's a complete mess, and everything is in disarray, and you obviously haven't been running a very clean ship, then they might just walk away just because it's such a mess, okay? So make sure all that stuff's squared away. Let's take a break here real quick. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you do know that I have a seller guide for those of you who are considering getting your property on the market here soon. If that's something that would interest you, feel free to reach out to me on my website. Link to that is in the description section down below. Just go there, register in the comment section, say seller guide so I know what to send you. Now, let's go and finish today's video. One of the biggest mistakes, at least from a legal standpoint, is not coordinating with the tenant when it comes to the showings. So tenants by law are required to have a 24-hour notice minimum that there's going to be any kind of a showing. You cannot just show up the last minute on their doorstep and be like, okay, it's a showing time, let us in. That's not how this works, Ranger. Okay, you got to slow down a little bit and you have to make sure that you're coordinating with them ahead of time because they've got lives that they're trying to live too. And that's, we have to be considerate of that. And, it's also a legal requirement. So yes, 24 hours minimum, heads up. Now, another big mistake kind of dovetailing into that is that you cannot expect the tenant to care nearly as much about the sale of the property as you do. You stand to gain a lot by selling the property. The tenant does not. Okay, to them, they're probably just getting a new landlord that may or may not decide to keep them around. And to them, there's nothing in it for them to make sure the property shows well or that they're being nice to the buyer agent who's coming in or the buyer. To their minds, they're doing you a favor and, they really have nothing to gain by it. So don't expect them to be nearly as motivated about it as you are. Matter of fact, it's probably going to be the other direction. If you find one that's neutral, that's usually about the best you can hope for. All right, last but not least, not having all of your keys collected into one spot can definitely cause a lot of confusion, a lot of stress at the very last minute. So you want to make sure all your keys are together. Utility rooms, spare backup keys for each one of the units. If you have garage doors, make sure you have keys for those. Like all the keys for the property collected, properly labeled, all in one spot. They can either be at your property, at your primary residence, and you just drop it off somewhere. It can be at the property in a safe somewhere. But just make sure all these keys are in one spot. So when we go to hand them off, we're not in this really confused, stressful situation about a week out from closing where we're trying to find keys for everything. Okay, so we know this is coming up. Let's just make sure that we have it taken care of so it's a pretty stress-free at the very end of the process. So this has been your video talking about the enormous mistakes that I see sellers make when they're trying to sell properties with renters. I hope it's been useful. Give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you have any questions in the comment section down below.